She stood there in the cold, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, staring at the glass doors of the clinic as if they held all the answers she was too afraid to ask for. The wind picked up, scattering dead leaves across the empty parking lot, and still she didn't move. People walked past her, some glancing with mild curiosity, others too absorbed in their own lives to notice the woman who looked like she was holding the weight of the world on her shoulders. Her name was Claire, and she'd been standing there for 20 minutes, trying to find the courage to walk inside. She didn't know that across the street, sitting on a bench with a cooling cup of coffee, someone was watching her with growing concern. She didn't know that in just a few moments, a complete stranger would change the trajectory of her entire day, maybe even her life. Claire had driven 40 minutes to get to this clinic, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. She'd left early in the morning, before her husband David woke up, leaving only a note on the kitchen counter that she had errands to run. It wasn't exactly a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. The truth was too complicated, too heavy to put into words, even for the man she'd been married to for 8 years. They'd been trying to have a baby for 3 of those years, enduring test after test, procedure after procedure, each disappointment cutting a little deeper than the last. The doctors had said there was one more option, one more treatment that might work, but it was expensive and the success rate wasn't guaranteed. David had wanted to try it. He'd looked at her with such hope in his eyes, talking about baby names and nursery colors, and Claire had smiled and nodded because she couldn't bear to dim that light in him. But inside, she was terrified. The appointment was for a consultation, just a meeting to discuss the next steps. But to Claire, it felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. What if they went through with it and it failed? What if this was their last chance and it slipped through their fingers like all the others? What if she couldn't give David the family he deserved? The questions had been circling in her mind for weeks, growing louder and more insistent until she could barely sleep. That morning, sitting in her car in the clinic parking lot, those questions became a roar. She'd gotten out of the car, walked halfway to the entrance, and then just stopped. Her feet wouldn't move forward. Her chest felt tight, like she couldn't get enough air. She told herself to breathe, to just take one step and then another, but fear had wrapped itself around her like chains. Across the street, the woman on the bench had been watching this quiet struggle unfold. Her name was Elena, and she was a nurse at the hospital 2 blocks away, taking her break before the afternoon shift. She'd seen Claire pull into the parking lot, seeing her sit in the car for a long time before finally emerging. At first, Elena thought maybe the woman was just nervous about a doctor's appointment, something common and manageable. But as the minutes ticked by and Claire remained frozen outside the doors, something in Elena's heart shifted. She recognized that particular kind of stillness, that look of someone who's fighting a battle no one else can see. Elena had been there herself once, years ago, standing outside a different building with different fears, but the same crushing weight of uncertainty. Elena stood up, left her coffee on the bench, and crossed the street. She approached slowly, carefully, the way you might approach a frightened animal. When she was a few feet away, she spoke softly. She said that it was getting cold out here, and sometimes the hardest part was just walking through the door. Claire turned to look at her, startled, her eyes red-rimmed and exhausted. She opened her mouth to say something polite, something dismissive that would send this stranger away, but what came out instead was the truth. She said she didn't know if she could do this. She said she was scared. She said she felt like she was letting everyone down, especially her husband, and she didn't know how to carry that weight anymore. Elena didn't offer empty reassurances or tell Claire that everything would be fine. She didn't pretend to know what Claire was going through or minimize her fears. Instead, she just nodded, acknowledging the pain as real and valid. Then she told Claire her own story. She talked about the miscarriages, 3 of them in 2 years, each one leaving her more broken than the last. She talked about the day she'd stood outside a fertility clinic just like this one, so paralyzed by fear that her husband had to practically carry her inside. She talked about the treatment that had failed, the grief that had nearly destroyed her marriage, and the long, painful journey of learning that her worth wasn't measured by her ability to have children. But she also talked about the unexpected joy that came later, the adopted daughter who'd filled their home with laughter, the realization that family could be built in ways she'd never imagined. Claire listened, tears streaming down her face, and for the first time in months, she didn't feel so utterly alone. Elena reached out and gently took her hand. She said that whatever Claire decided, whether she walked through those doors today or turned around and went home, it didn't make her weak or selfish or any of the terrible things she was probably telling herself. She said that courage wasn't about being fearless. It was about acknowledging the fear and choosing what felt right anyway. She said that Claire's husband would love her no matter what, that a real marriage wasn't about meeting expectations, but about facing life's hardest moments together. And she said that standing here, trying to be brave even when it felt impossible, already proved how strong Claire was. They stood there together for a while, two strangers bound by shared pain and unexpected understanding. Elena asked if Claire wanted her to walk inside with her, or if she needed to call someone, or if she just wanted to sit down for a minute and catch her breath. Claire wiped her eyes and took a shaky breath. She said she thought she needed to call her husband. She said she'd been trying to protect him from her fears, but maybe that was the wrong approach. Maybe he needed to know how scared she was. Maybe they needed to make this decision together, really together, not with her pretending to be braver than she felt. Elena smiled and squeezed her hand. She said that sounded like a wise choice. Claire pulled out her phone with trembling fingers and dialed David's number. He answered on the second ring, his voice bright and cheerful, asking how the errands were going. And then Claire did something she hadn't done in a long time. She told him the truth. She told him where she was. She told him she was terrified. She told him she didn't know if she could go through another treatment, another disappointment, another loss. There was silence on the other end, and for a horrible moment, Claire thought maybe she'd made a mistake. But then David's voice came through, soft and thick with emotion. He said he was sorry. He said he'd been so focused on the goal that he hadn't noticed how much she was struggling. He said he loved her more than any hypothetical future, and if she needed to stop, they would stop. He said he was leaving work right now and would be there in 30 minutes. He said she didn't have to face this alone. When Claire hung up, she was crying again, but this time it felt different, lighter somehow. Elena was still standing beside her, a gentle presence in the chaos. Claire thanked her, her voice breaking, saying she didn't know what would have happened if Elena hadn't crossed the street. Elena shook her head and said that Claire would have figured it out eventually, because strong people always do, but sometimes we all need a reminder that we don't have to carry everything alone. She wrote her phone number on a piece of paper and handed it to Claire, telling her to call if she ever needed to talk, no matter what. Then she gave Claire a long, warm hug, the kind that says everything words can't. David arrived 28 minutes later, his shirt untucked and his hair messy like he'd run out of the office without thinking twice. He found Claire sitting on a bench near the entrance, Elena's phone number folded carefully in her pocket. When he saw her face, he didn't ask questions or try to solve anything. He just pulled her into his arms and held her while she cried. They talked for over an hour, right there in the clinic parking lot, about fear and hope and what they really wanted versus what they thought they should want. By the end, they decided to postpone the appointment. Not to give up, but to time to heal, to reconnect, to make sure whatever path they chose next was one they walked together with open eyes and honest hearts. Claire never did go inside the clinic that day, but a year later, she and David returned, this time hand in hand, their decision made together with clear minds and brave hearts. The treatment didn't work, and while the grief was real and sharp, they faced it together. 2 years after that, they welcomed a foster child into their home, a little boy with bright eyes and a shy smile who needed a family as much as they needed him. And through all of it, Claire kept Elena's phone number in her wallet. They met for coffee sometimes, these two women bound by a moment of kindness on a cold day outside a clinic. Elena came to the boy's adoption celebration, tears of joy streaming down her face as she watched Claire and David become parents in the way that mattered most. The story of that day eventually became something Claire shared with others, women she met through support groups and online forums, women standing at their own cliffs trying to find the courage to jump or walk away. She told them about the stranger who crossed the street when she needed it most, about the power of being seen in your darkest moment, about how sometimes the right choice isn't the